Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. It is always an honour to rise in this place, and in today's matter is one about transparency and common sense ideas. Because contained within this report are a few common sense recommendations that unfortunately this Liberal government and their radical Minister of the Environment have chosen to simply ignore. Now, make no mistake, Madam Speaker, there has never been a more ideologically driven Minister of the Environment than the one we have today. Even if we set aside the previous arrests and the utter disdain for Canada's energy sector, I truly believe at some point in the not-too-distant future we will all come to realize that we have never had such an incompetent and ineffective Minister of the Environment for Canada. Now, not only has he failed to improve Canada's climate outcomes, Canada's performance is actually even the worst in the G7, despite the claims that they may make all of the time. He has imposed a crippling carbon tax that punishes seniors trying to heat their homes during our cold winters. And I can tell you, Madam Speaker, in Manitoba, the rumors are true, it does get cold, and they deserve to have that same heat and quality of life. He targets moms and dads who are struggling to fill their tanks to take their kids to school, to hockey practice, to soccer practice, to music lessons, or anything else. That is, if they can still afford to put their kids in such important programs like that. This minister has done more damage to Canada's economy than almost any other minister of the Crown in our nation's history. He has forced us to pay for his carbon tax. And for what, Madam Speaker? The Liberals may not want to admit it, publicly at least, but they are nowhere near meeting their emissions targets. Simply put, they are failing. Failing because their climate plan was never about the climate, it was always about taxes. Their carbon tax is a major contributor to the inflation that is driving up the cost of everything, causing millions of Canadians to visit food banks every year just to put something in their stomachs after not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. And in Canada, we now have a resurgence of scurvy because people can't afford enough fruits and vegetables. Scurvy! This is insane. This is embarrassing. And the fact that this Prime Minister's legacy will be a country where people can't buy enough nutritious food to keep themselves healthy is something that I imagine he will be very ashamed of when his tenure comes to an end. Now, while Canadians are being forced to pay for this Liberal carbon tax, most people I talk to sadly recognize that we are in a cost of living crisis. While we are threatened by tariffs from our largest trading partner, while our GDP per capita declines steadily, while millions of Canadians are just $200 away from insolvency, while household debt has reached new record highs, and while the vast majority of young people that I talk to can't afford to buy a home and frankly have lost all hope and have given up the idea of even trying to ever have that happen in their lives. This minister is on a mission for some strange reason to continue down this path of quadrupling the carbon tax. And probably more if given the chance when he gave a very unclear answer at our Environment Committee just last week. And he still thinks everything is fine. It's not fine. It's not fine for millions of people in this country. I have never met anyone more out of touch, more disconnected from the realities facing Canadian families, students, seniors, and everybody else. He has no understanding of the pain and suffering that he is causing right now, and it certainly doesn't appear that he even cares about it. He thinks we should all just shut up and pay his carbon tax because he knows what's best for people. He has lost the plot, Madam Speaker. He has climbed so far up the CN Tower, his ivory tower, that he has lost all sense of reality. Now, this brings me to the number 2 recommendation within the report, one that clearly states that the Minister and the Prime Minister surely did not read, and I will also mention, Madam Speaker, I'll be splitting my time with the member for Dauphin Swan River Neepawa. Now, this recommendation is that the government must direct its incentives to technologies that actually reduce emissions, and what a reasonable idea that is. Now, thank goodness for the Commissioner of the Environment who has shown a glaring spotlight on this Liberals' Net Zero Accelerator initiative. Now, it's like the Liberal ministers are playing poker with each other. I see your green slush fund and I raise you a net zero accelerator fund. It is an $8 billion Liberal boondoggle in the making. $8 billion handed over to large multinational corporations while the Minister of Environment taxes seniors, students, families, and anybody else he can get his hands in their pockets for. The findings of the Environment Commissioner's report regarding the $8 billion initiative are terrifying to say the least. This program, touted as one of the cornerstones of the Liberal government's climate efforts, has been nothing but a complete failure. The Liberals have mismanaged this fund to the point of negligence, like many other things that they have gotten their hands on. The department failed to track whether the initiative was delivering real value for money in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. A reasonable idea, value for money audits. The Liberal government has failed to do that. Now, simply put, taxpayers have no idea of knowing if their hard-earned tax dollars are going to something that's actually going to reduce emissions as it claims to do. So let's talk numbers, Madam Speaker. The report shows that for 5 corporations that actually had a commitment to reduce emissions in their contracts, the cost of taxpayers to reduce just 1 ton of greenhouse gases was $143 per ton. Now that might sound like a lot, but it actually gets much worse. For the other 12 projects funded with that same $8 billion, there are no signed commitments to reduce emissions whatsoever. Because these projects did not have any signed contributions, the Commissioner's audit found that the overall cost is $523 per ton of emissions reduced under this program. Now, the Liberals promised results like they always do, and once again have failed to deliver on yet another promise, and have just simply delivered another wasteful program. It's not one that can measure results. That is not how you develop a program for anything. They have squandered billions with no real clear targets, no clear outcomes, and no clear plans of how to achieve anything. This is not a climate action plan. It is a tax funder paid boondoggle. So our Environment Committee did the responsible thing and passed a motion demanding full access to the contracts the Liberals signed with these massive corporations. And of course, our common sense conservative team led the charge because we believe that taxpayers should know where their money is being spent and if it's being spent in a useful manner. But here's the kicker. The Liberal government completely disregarded our committee's motion, stonewalling us for months. And then once they did kind of hand over the documents, they pulled out hundreds that we simply couldn't see and redacted so much of it that it made it largely irrelevant. They simply don't want members of Parliament and therefore Canadians to know where $8 billion is going. They don't want us to know how many jobs may or will not be maintained or ever created. They don't want us to know how much emissions will actually be reduced through any of these program spendings. It's ridiculous to say the least, Madam Speaker. It is insane how far this Prime Minister and his radical Minister of Environment will go to hide the truth. Exhibit A, the ongoing Green Slush Fund debate here in the House of Commons. They don't care about outcomes. They care about announcements. They care about press releases and press conferences. They care to be seen to be doing something, not actually doing anything. It's virtue signaling on the taxpayer's dime. It's lazy environmental policy, and it's simply no way to run a government. They are failing, and they are failing miserably. Members of Parliament simply need to see how these tax dollars are being spent. We deserve to know if the Net Zero Accelerator is accomplishing its stated goals. And while the Liberal MPs on committee gave every lame excuse that they could not to learn the truth, it was the Conservatives that got them to vote in favour of the motion we passed at that committee, that given the government has failed to provide the committee with the following documents and information relating to their $8 billion Net Zero Accelerator Fund, all complete contribution agreements signed to date for the Net Zero Accelerator, the government's complete tracker tool used to measure the Net Zero Accelerator's progress and results, and all internal Net Zero Accelerator targets set by the government, including the government's Net Zero Accelerator emissions reduction targets. A very reasonable motion passed at our committee. And guess what? The Liberals are doing what they always do. They are trying to defy Parliament once again. They refuse to abide by this motion, and today it is just the beginning of our mission to discover how rotten this Net Zero Accelerator Fund truly is. We deserve to know results because Canadians deserve to know results. We represent the people who pay their taxes to fund these sorts of programs, and it's ridiculous that the Liberals are continuing to try to hide the truth. The Environment Committee has much more work to do in order to get to the bottom of this boondoggle and find solutions that can actually deliver results for taxpayers, because Canadians deserve nothing less. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Madam Speaker, I have found this a fascinating exposition in avoiding actual facts. So right now, when we're looking at emissions in Canada are at the lowest they've been in almost 3 decades, and that's actually verified by independent reports. So when the member opposite keeps talking about everything that he believes we should do to stop fighting climate change, I'm fascinated because we actually see that what we're doing is working. But let's say one more thing, because I have this question. Economists across Canada have said that the most efficient way to fight climate change is the price on carbon pollution. If they want to remove it, what's the Conservative plan?
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisgar.
Well, I thank my honourable colleague for the question, although I wish she would have listened to my speech, because what I was talking about is how the Liberals need to stop wasting money without achieving any results. And we, in fact, know that the Liberal government is failing in its objectives thanks to the work of the Environment Commissioner, highlighting that they are not on track in any way to meet their stated emissions reduction goals. We also have a report showing that Canada is 62nd of 67 in the world. We are last in the G7. If this is achieving something, I don't know what they think they are trying to accomplish here. They are failing. And in terms of the carbon tax, I would invite that member to come to my riding, talk to my constituents, and try to see if they think they're better off under this carbon tax.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. The recommendation 2 of this report asks that we require the government to prove that these are efficient means before we implement them. The first thing I'm thinking of is carbon capture. We've been talking about this all day. It's been tested elsewhere, and it doesn't work. So I would like to hear what my colleague has to say about this. Does he think that we should first prove that this works elsewhere before investing colossal amounts in this? I don't want it to blow up in 15 years.
Well, thank you for the question, and I appreciate that member understands the need to actually focus on results for taxpayer dollars. And in terms of carbon capture and storage, yes, it seems like a promising lead in a way to actually reduce emissions. And the good news is the private sector is leading the way in this. They are the ones that are trying to make investments and reduce their emissions. So while the technology is promising, I think there is so much more because we are innovative. If we had a government that stopped stifling through regulation and legislation the innovators and entrepreneurs in this country, we would more rapidly, through technology, not taxes, achieve the emissions reduction goals that this country has aimed to, and under our Conservative government, we will.
Honourable Member for Victoria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, but the member didn't completely answer the question. Really, my colleague's question was about, are you going to hand over public money to private companies for an unproven technology that, in other areas is being used to produce more oil, to raise emissions? Carbon capture and storage, as the IPC has said, is one of the most expensive, least proven at scale technologies to meet our net zero goals. This government has given over $5.8 billion to profitable oil and gas companies when they could be doing this themselves. Will the member commit to pushing for private investment into carbon capture and storage if they so choose, but to no longer put public money into unproven technology?
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisgar.
Thank you to my colleague from the Environment Committee. Listen. CCUS is one example. What I'm focused on, I think the first principle as when the new common sense Conservative government steps in, is to review programs like this to see where money has been wasted and where it has been successful. And thanks to the work of the Environment Commissioner, we now know that this is a failed project. Once again, I am more than proud to say that we are going to unleash Canada's energy potential. Stop the strangulation of our energy sector and let them do the investing both in terms of emissions reductions and, yes, creating wealth for Canadians once again in this country.